Hello, everyone, and welcome to. Well, I guess this is a podcast. I see at this bit there'd be like a cool jingle. There'd be like a do 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 bum ba ba da ba ba bum. It's the Obsidian Pixels podcast, and I'm thinking of like a 1950s jingle vibe, but we don't have the money. We don't got anything for a podcast. I mean, it's literally me sitting in a room on my own with a headset on talking into the void. So, I guess this is how podcasters start? Natch, yeah. Well, I mean, every time I make a video, I have a loose thing what I want to talk about. Or sometimes I don't talk about anything in particular at all. This time, however, I really do want to talk about something important. This time, I want to focus on Doctor Who. Yeah, I know, that's kind of what I always talk about, but hear me out. See, when Peter Capaldi took over as Doctor Who, there was, of course, the introduction of the character of Missy, short for Mistress, which is the obvious gender inversion of the Master, being that Michelle Gomez had taken over from John Sim as the new female incarnation of the Renegade Time Lord. One that was brilliant because it finally cemented the... I don't know why it was still held as some sort of theory, because of course we'd heard tale of it before, but this finally cemented the fact that Time Lords could change gender, with obviously this happening later on. But I wanted to kind of talk about my feelings in regards to that. Being a trans person who is very slowly working their way through transitioning, it's like the slowest magical girl transformation scene ever. It's whack, yo. But the Missy reveal was important to me in the sense that we had a character who for a very long time had identified as male, had presented as masculine, or at least whatever the Time Lord equivalent of present as masculine is. It's very difficult to try and pin that down when your species doesn't really have a solid concept of gender. I mean, it's pretty much fanon, but though slightly confirmed by Word of God, is that Word of God being producers and writers on the show, that Time Lord gender is incredibly fluid. I believe Neil Gaiman said it themselves, that Time Lords don't particularly have gender as humans do. It might have not been Gaiman, but it was definitely someone in the production show. I should have looked this up before I started talking, but hey, who needs research? Getting back to my point, is one thing I felt very strongly about was when Missy introduces herself, a character would always recognize them as a Time Lord. And one thing I found particularly powerful, particularly good, was that she would always correct them. They would say, "You're a Time Lord," and she would correct them by saying, "No, I'm a Time Lady, please, I'm old-fashioned." Now, setting aside the whole Time Lord being a genderless honorific, with, some people preferring to take the gendered female honorific as well, Lord being... That's a different kettle of fish entirely. The one thing I wanted to sort of focus on there is, though, Missy really doubles down on the Time Lady aspect. Obviously from an an out-universe point of view, from a writer's room perspective, they wanted to solidify her gender, her status. But within universe, I feel it's very... Personally, to me, that's incredibly powerful, because it cements this feeling of, no, this is who I am, and you're going to roll with it. I'm the person who gets to play the gender identification game here, and I'm telling you, this is how I identify. And it's very good for me, as someone who does occasionally, more than once or twice, have to correct people's pronoun usage, or correct how people identify, or specifically code me. So having a character who has such agency about their gender and how they identify is something quite brilliant, and it's something quite wonderful to see, especially multiple times. She's had that as a bit of a running joke, but not in the joke of the haha men in dress joke tinged with unbearable levels of transphobia. It's a joke of assumption. It's a joke of, I'm laughing at you, I know better kind of deal. It's Missy, again, she's having her own agency in her gender, and that is sort of, that laid the foundation for the 12th to regenerate into the 13th incarnation. Of course, with this kind of narrative of constantly correcting people assuming, that I feel for me that laid a foundation, because now you have a character who has been known for literally generations now. nearly 60 years. Well, it's over 50 years of their incarnation, their history, the show's history of a character being presented as masculine. I kind of want to sort of point out, always presented as masculine. I never want to try and ascribe a specific gender identity to the Doctor, because of course, again, it's very fluid for them. That we've had references and jokes about it in the past, but I think it's very important to kind of acknowledge that. But they have presented always as masculine for so many years. For an outside perspective for the show, it's been 50 plus years. For the in-universe, it's been thousands of years for the character. And what I find particularly brilliant is now that we're seeing them in this new gendered perspective, this female perspective, it really does help put a few interesting things in place. For example, the constant I would have never had this problem if I was a man joke, or the I never got to do this when I was a man joke, which for me is simply funny as a trans person, because it's that kind of, well, I never got to do this, or I never had to do this, or I never had to put up with this kind of humour, which either side of the trans divide, whichever binary you prefer to identify as, that's kind of a funny joke. That is kind of a narrative we all do see. But it's also showing this character changing. Like, especially for young viewers now in a climate where, and this is going to get political, where trans people are kind of the boogeyman, or boogie woman. We are being kind of made to be like that, and it's very unfortunate. And I appreciate the fact that we had a villain who didn't ascribe to gender binaries in the form of Missy, who eventually became someone good, who had always perhaps been good deep down. They're a renegade, to say the least. But the Doctor, who's always been a hero of heroes, a compassionate and beautiful person, has changed their gender identity and their pronouns and how people perceive them, is a narrative that is important to me. Because we, like I say, we have this boogeyman right now. We have trans people being demonized by media the world over. We're being made to look very dangerous. We need this, especially the fact that Doctor Who's audience, its target audience, a large percentage of it is for kids. It's children who watch the show, and it's educational. Like, Doctor Who's always been, well, Doctor Who started out trying to be a science and education show. It always wanted to try and sell the idea of wonderful science fiction, and I think it's still being educational. A lot more of Doctor Who's stuff is less about science and more about morality. The Doctor has always been a wonderfully morally centered person. But I think now, showing this somewhat inadvertent trans narrative, we see that we're being shown a character who's transitioned their gender, who's just the same person as before, a little different, but aren't we all? And that we are the same person. And I think that's very, very important to see, and it's great to see. I mean, it's not as it would be brilliant to have a show with a trans character who goes through that transition, especially if it was a show aimed at a younger audience, not necessarily just having a queer audience. The thing is, having a trans character, it's 99% of the time it's going to be in queer media, meaning you've already got a large demographic of people who are like, yes, we are represented, and that's brilliant. I am never going to debate if we ever need that, because we are always going to need queer media, and we're always going to need trans characters in queer media. But what I want to see more of is characters like this who are in not queer media, not specifically aimed for queer people, but just having a character like this who exists in this space and is a representation to show that we are not this boogeyman. And I think the Doctor does a brilliant thing, because of course, children are wonderfully impressionable. I was a child, I know what that's like. So to see them seeing a character go through this change, and it to be completely understandable, and it to be completely brilliant and beautiful and wonderful for the person to be able to make this change, then you're going to foster this idea of it's perfectly normal. Because I never got that when I was younger. I never got that idea of it's perfectly normal and safe for a character to transition, to change. I mean, change has always been, in Doctor Who at least, change has always been this wonderful narrative that's always gone through the show, but that's more gone hand in hand with regeneration, the changing of writers. It's kind of been a more meta analysis for characters rather than the overall story arc or contents or elements within the show. And that's okay. You're allowed to have this kind of work in fiction. But what we need to see more of then is that representation. And speaking of representation, Doctor Who has been good with representation, but it could be miles better. That is, of course, any criticism instantaneously makes it sound bad. I don't want to ever criticize something like that, because of course Doctor Who gave us its first lesbian character. It's had a pansexual character. We have had a trans actress on the show, though in a minor role they didn't play a trans character, which I think was a unfortunate problem that we could have done better with an actual trans character being played by a trans actress. And I think missed opportunity, actually. I know Chibnall wanted to start fresh, and I completely respect that decision. But I feel like a missed opportunity would have been having a trans companion in Doctor Who to work alongside the narrative of a character who's changed their gender almost instantly. You know, within the space of 30 seconds, they went from presenting as male to presenting as female to having a companion alongside them who is taking a journey. I mean, a transition. For some people, a transition is not instantaneous, but it's quick. For some people, it's a decision and a choice progress that they wrestle with for a very long time. And it would have been nice to have that as a companionship alongside the Doctor, to have this motif, these two characters sharing in their new outlook, their new perspective in life. It would have been something that I would have loved to have seen adapted. Even if we had an episode with a trans character, I would be over the moon. I would be absolutely delighted. Doctor Who seriously needs more LGBTQ representation. It does brilliantly, and while I love the theme of Doctors transitioning of gender and their gender identity and how that all comes together as a spectrum, as an idea, as this thing that I can relate to, I still feel there are much bigger strides to be made. And so having a trans character who works alongside the Doctor and not necessarily an alien. Now, again, this feels like a criticism. Of course, we had a character in the Tusanaga conundrum who was male and had a baby. That's fine, that's fair. It was a male alien. I mean, this was said in the year XYZ, so it was far off future. There weren't actually any humans left. They were all proto-human and such. So I don't want to debate that sort of area, but the fact that they had a humanoid-looking characters, they looked human, then they gave birth, they were the male, that did kick up a lot of spark of some quote-unquote controversy as people took to their swords on Twitter and decided to skewer the episode for that. Personally, I liked it. Personally, it was fine. It would have been nice to have a trans character, but at the same time, I mean, yeah, why not? Let's do this. Let's just fully embrace the wackiness that Doctor Who can give us. But that said, I would like to have a trans character where they are part of the story and their transness isn't a part of the story. Like, I feel like if you're in a lot of TV, if you're going to put a trans character in there, you make the trans aspect of their life intrinsic to the story. And while that's nice, I feel like that's kind of being heavy-handed in the nature of having this kind of character. And if we would just have a trans character there existing as trans, I feel that's more it, because then you just kind of tell everyone. It's difficult because in media, if you kind of constantly have this is a character and we're always going to talk about their trans story, media is never going to progress beyond this point of being just about trans people. You want to tell stories. I want to see stories. I want to see stories about us where we are engineers, we're scientists, we're doctors, we're mothers, we're fathers, we're uncles, we're aunts, we are makers, inventors, creators, lawyers, writers. I want to see that. I want to see how our lives are lives and not just narratives. It feels so frustrating, especially with a show like Doctor Who, which can go anywhere, anytime, any place. It would be nice to have maybe a trans character who could know that the future is going to be okay for how they feel. Because right now we exist in a very uncertain time for trans people. We've recently had in America the rollback of allowing trans people to serve in the military. And while I don't agree with the military as a whole, we can obviously see that this is a early step towards attacking trans rights within the United States. And so I think that yes, we need to tell more stories, especially hopeful stories about trans people. Again, a big narrative. If you're not telling stories about trans people transitioning and that struggle, you're telling trans stories about abuse. And that's not to say, again, it's not something that doesn't happen, but it's you make this one story, you keep making these stories about how trans people live this depressive life. I want to celebrate. I want trans stories to be celebrated. I want to portray... I say I want to do it. I say I want to see it. But I want to see trans lives being good for a change. But, yeah, I don't know where I was going with this podcast. This has been very free form. I tried to sit down and write about it and write my thoughts about how queer stuff comes together, trans stuff, and it didn't quite work. I sat in front of a word processor for 15 minutes going, ah! So instead I decided to freeform it, and these topics come from a bit of a flow of consciousness, but what I do think is that we need more queer stuff. I mean, that is straight off the bat. What I would love to see from Doctor Who is a further continuation of this narrative. It was touched upon, but especially if characters like Missy were to come back, I would like to see the exploration of gender identity, or another character that the Doctor knows from their past, say like Romana or Drax or someone like that. Again, it would be a nice nod and a little bit of exploration towards their gender identity and how it's changed, because I feel that's important. I feel like having a character who has evolved in such a way is very important to show people that, yeah, you're allowed to do this, and there's no stigma behind it. Because again, we're still living in a very for a very long time, I'm trying to put this into words now, we lived in a very stigma-filled environment if you were to be someone who explored your gender identity, or to be someone who thought of your gender identity as something outside of the binary. For a very long time it was considered a taboo. People who were identified as male at birth, if they tried to explore their gender identity outside of the norm for a very long time, especially, at least in my living memory, it was something considered either taboo or a comedy act, and I think that's perhaps linking back into my own stories here, into my own narrative. It's potentially why I took so long to come out, and it took so long for me to get to grips with what I was feeling. That's getting off topic. What we do need, however, is a more safe exploration of, or not so much exploration, but we need people to show on screen that this is normal and this is okay. And while I have been talking about Doctor Who, yes, Doctor Who should do it. Lots of other shows should do it. I use Doctor Who as a linchpin because it's a show that not only appeals to kids, but adults as well. It's one of those shows that informs young minds, and I think that's a great place to start with, to sort of say, this is okay. This has been a bit of a ramble. It's a bit of a weird one as a topic to cover because it's very personal. It's very on your own. And especially in this context where I am just talking into a microphone, it is very on my own about how I feel about things. I would love to open this up as a discussion, however, to talk about it more with other people and to say, what do you think? What do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? What do you want to see more of in media? I mean, we have a comment section, we have a discussion box place thing. What do you want to see more of? I mean, do you want to see more trans-related, non-binary related journeys, narratives, adventures? Certainly I want to see stories outside of the simple, woe is me, this is my transition, because I feel like that's such a hyper-specific thing, and often these things are played for tragedy rather than celebration. So many trans stories are told for the emotional manipulation and the drama of being, this is sad, 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 because you have to go through all this horror and terror, which portrays it and really creates a negative stigma. Whereas I would like to see, if someone's going to do it, celebrate it. Tell it as it is. It's wonderful, it's livid, it's colourful, it's genius, it's bright, it's beautiful. Sell it like that, and we can see more of what this can be. I would like to see more of these powerful, wonderful trans narratives. We'll see. Yeah, like I say, this has been a ramble. I never actually script these things. But yeah. Leave your opinions and comments in the section below. I tried to get us back to as many as possible, and it'd be great if you guys want me to talk about a specific topic or something interesting, especially related to LGBTQ stuff. We'll see. Well, I've been Obsidian Pixels. you guys stay safe, stay beautiful, stay awesome, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.